Hi, this is Richard Rizk. I'm in Seattle, Washington, at Avvo's headquarters, speaking with Josh King, Vice President and General Counsel of Avvo. Hi, Josh. Good to meet you. Thanks for meeting with me.
You bet, Rich.
You know, it's been about 2 years since I came to visit Avvo, and I noticed a couple of things that have changed since then. First off, you're in a new building, right?
Right.
You had a couple of moves.
Yeah, we've pretty much moved every 2 years in our history.
Why is that?
Well, for one, we're cheap, so we've moved from sublease to sublease.
Oh.
And despite this beautiful space we have here, this is a sublease as well that we got well below market. But we're actually about to move again. We've
Really?
outgrown this space, and so we're finally doing a long-term move with our own space that we're building out, and we'll be moving into that space in about 2 months.
Cool. You know, another thing I noticed right off the bat is you're not Conrad Saab.
That's right.
And
I got more hair.
That's right. He's completely bald, isn't he? You have kind of a different role at Avvo than Conrad. Please tell me about that.
Well, I've been with Avvo for about 5.5 years, and I run the legal work here at Avvo. I'm Avvo's lawyer as the general counsel. I also handle our business development, our government relations, all of our work with the bars, as well as our office administration, HR, finance, dealing with the new move, all of that stuff.
Now, you're in Washington, but you're actually an Oregon Duck.
I am, yes. I went to the University of Oregon. I grew up in Oregon, in Bend, but I've been up here for about 12 years.
And now you're involved, you bike to work?
I do, yeah. It's I've become an avid bike commuter ever since I moved to Seattle, out of the suburbs about 4 years ago, and so I ride pretty much every day.
Well, I've read that Mark describes you as a business person more than a lawyer. Can you explain that?
I like to think of myself that way. I only was in the private practice of law for a couple of years before I went in-house. And so I guess I wasn't infected by that way of too much lawyerly thinking at first. I went in-house back in '96 in the cellular industry, and you really have to, particularly in a fast-moving industry as that was at that time, as it was growing, you really have to develop a business mindset. And so in my time in telecom, I actually moved into a variety of different roles, including spending 5 years before Avvo in non-legal roles. So I worked doing M&A work for AT&T Wireless and then for Clearwire, strictly on the business side. And so it definitely informs my thinking as a lawyer, is you have your legal risks, but you also have business opportunities.
And you were involved in the mergers and acquisition of Cellular, right?
Right.
What did you learn from that experience?
Well, I learned an awful lot. I mean, one of the things was I learned how you can get overnight interest on $46 billion in cash.
Really?
In working on what was and still is today the largest all-cash transaction in history.
Wow.
And which was a fascinating year-long process of selling AT&T Wireless. But certainly when you do M&A work, there is a very heavy legal overlay to it, and so having my legal background definitely helped a lot. But you also realize just how important those business opportunities are, and you can mitigate legal risks to a point, but you also always have to realize what the implications are and how much business opportunity might lie on the other side of a legal risk.
Got it. And you're also a part of the public participation project. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so the PPP, on which I'm a board member, is an organization that's devoted to establishing a nationwide anti-SLAPP law. And an anti-SLAPP law is simply a law that's designed to make it easier for defendants in lawsuits involving their exercise of their First Amendment rights to get rid of those lawsuits. In the most traditional sense, it happens in public participation, where someone is petitioning the government about maybe to stop a development or a law that they have an issue with, and it turns into a lawsuit. In the more expansive context, it's whenever people exercise their First Amendment rights, and then they get sued for doing so, typically in the context of a frivolous defamation claim. And so obviously that's something that's relevant to what we're doing here at Avvo. We've been subjected to some SLAPP suits ourselves. And so these laws, these anti-SLAPP laws, allow defendants to get the case dismissed at the very earliest point without incurring a lot of fees, and typically have a fee-shifting provision where then you recover your fees from the losing plaintiff who brought the suit in the first instance. Washington has a great anti-SLAPP law. Oregon and California do. Texas and D.C. have enacted such laws in the last couple of years. but we really need to have a nationwide anti-SLAPP law to make it easier for people to express themselves without fear of being ruined with frivolous litigation.
Right, and you're looking for a standardized law
Right.
throughout the United States so everyone knows what the rules are.
Right, and so there's not forum shopping and people looking to file suits in states that have weak or non-existent anti-SLAPP laws.
Got it. You know, Avvo is still being sued by lawyers as recently as 2012.
Yes.
Tell me about the Davis versus Avvo suit.
Well, the Davis, we don't get sued often. I mean, I don't want there to be a misnomer that we're always being sued. We certainly have a lot of lawyers who threaten to sue us, but because despite having 120,000 lawyers who claim their profiles and use Avvo as a marketing platform, despite having thousands of paying customers who are advertising on Avvo and thousands of lawyers answering questions, there's still this low level of discontent with lawyers who either want to be fully in control of all of their information, don't really understand the First Amendment issues behind Avvo, and so they will sometimes resort to threatening to sue us. On a couple of occasions, they have actually sued us, including Davis. Every time we've been sued, it's been by a sanctioned lawyer, interestingly enough, who don't like the fact that we make it a lot easier for the consumers of legal services to find information about that sanction. Davis sued us in Florida, which does not have an anti-SLAPP law. We were successful in getting his case transferred here to Washington, where we then moved to dismiss the case under Washington's anti-SLAPP law. The case was dismissed under that law, and we got a judgment against him for our attorney's fees. And Washington has a statutory $10,000 penalty if that's imposed against the plaintiff if an anti-SLAPP motion is successful.
Have you ever lost a suit regarding an attorney who's upset with you?
No, I mean in fact, there's not been a suit filed against Avvo that's survived the pleadings.
Do you defend those personally?
No. Although I did start my career as a litigator, and I was convinced I wanted to be a litigator, and I love going to court. It's the sort of thing, particularly with the court rules and the need for familiarity with that, and simply the ability to ramp into a piece of litigation. I would be foolish if I undertook that myself at this point.
Well, back when I met with Conrad a couple years ago, the new thing was rating doctors, and I understand that Avvo no longer does this. They sold that part of their business to some other outfit. Tell me about what happened with rating doctors and what lessons have you learned from that?
Yeah, it's interesting. We so a few years back we thought that it would make sense to take what we've done with lawyers and sort of expand it into other professional verticals, starting with health. And so we built up a health directory, we built up a health business, and we started providing the same type of information, the ratings of doctors, the Q&A, all the content in health. What we found starting about a year ago, though, was that our legal business was really exploding, continuing to grow both in terms of traffic, consumers coming to the site, lawyers getting contacted by consumers, the advertising business, everything was really hitting on all cylinders there. At the meantime, the healthcare business was growing, but we were learning that healthcare is enormously complicated. It's a huge business, and we basically came to the conclusion that we really weren't doing justice to either our healthcare business or our legal business by splitting our focus, and that you really couldn't do either without being completely focused on it. And so we had to pick one. And it was a pretty easy choice, given our familiarity with legal, the brand we've built in legal, for us to essentially focus all of our resources on legal and cut healthcare loose. And so we sold that business to HealthTap. We're happy about it because it's a great home for the business. Sort of like we're focused on legal, they're very focused only on health. And so we feel good about having that with them, and then we can just pay attention to our legal business.
Good. And you and Mark are both lawyers.
We are, yeah.
So that's kind of your outlook on life.
Yeah, I mean, it makes it easier because we bring that to the table. I mean, we're not doctors. We can certainly learn about healthcare, and I follow healthcare pretty closely from a public policy perspective. But we're ultimately we can't bring that same depth of knowledge to that vertical.
Got it. Now, something that Avvo has done recently that I think is kind of controversial, and so do some commentators, is bidding for legal services, and I understand in the traffic case area that you did a trial of.
Right.
You're doing that right now, aren't you?
We are, yeah. So this is it's a new product we're rolling out. We call it, it's the Avvo Legal Marketplace. And the idea is, and we're testing it right now in traffic tickets and also in divorce. And the idea is that in pretty much every other industry you can think of, consumer products, services like hotel stays, contractor services, there's a lot of transparency around price, there's a lot of transparency around conditions of service, what have you, that doesn't really exist in legal. And so because we've got so much liquidity in our marketplace, we've got over 5 million consumers every month coming to Avvo, we're driving hundreds of thousands of contacts to lawyers, we've got both consumers and lawyers where we can have a marketplace. And one of the things we've noticed is that through our Q&A forum, and we have 10,000 questions a week coming into our Q&A, is that a lot of people, and we started noticing this in traffic tickets, but it's in other places as well, a lot of consumers don't really realize when they're asking questions where they shouldn't be asking a question, they should be going and hiring a lawyer.
Like traffic.
Yeah, I got a ticket for driving 112 miles an hour. Well, you shouldn't be asking that question on Avvo. You should be calling a lawyer. Yeah. And this hit home for me too, because before coming to Avvo, I, as a lawyer, didn't realize you could hire a lawyer to fight a traffic ticket. I knew you could if it was a DUI or something really serious, but I didn't realize that for a speeding ticket, where it might have a significant impact on your insurance, you could hire a lawyer to help with that. And so our theory is that by making that more aware to these consumers that they can hire a lawyer, that it's vastly going to expand the pie. Because right now, our perception, our research shows that there's a lot of people who have legal problems who could probably benefit from hiring a lawyer, but they don't because they don't have any transparency into the conditions of service and importantly, the price. So they don't really know what something's going to cost. And that's probably why outfits like LegalZoom have made such great inroads, because you go to LegalZoom, you know exactly what you're going to get. Yeah. You go on there, it's like, well, this is, your form's going to cost you $79. Walk through these 12 screens, fill out the information, done. You've got your will. Maybe it works for you, maybe it doesn't, but it's been a very transparent process. And so we're trying to bring a little bit of that to the legal industry through the marketplace. And yeah, there has been some concern from lawyers that it's going to be a race to the bottom, or it's all going to be competition on price. But we're really not that concerned about that, and we haven't seen that, frankly, in the data so far. People are doing a lot like what they would do with any other product or service. They're choosing across multiple dimensions. So they're looking at experience, they're looking at the Avvo rating, they're looking at client reviews, and price. I mean, these are all factors that go into it. The same way we would choose a hotel or someone to replace our roof or paint our house or whatever. Price is just one of the dimensions.
And there's nothing different about law.
There's nothing different about law. I mean, I know lawyers like to think there's something different about law, and I've been saying this for years when it comes to client reviews. There's no reason why clients can't review you. They may not have the ability to fully assess everything about the legal experience and the quality of the work you're providing. They can certainly commentate on the service level you provided them, your responsiveness, a whole host of things. And frankly, you can make a similar complaint about virtually any product or service. So yeah, there's ultimately nothing particularly special about law that means it can't be subjected to a little more transparency.
And so does Avvo have plans to expand this beyond the traffic tickets?
We probably will, yeah. I mean, right now it's in traffic tickets and in divorce, and we will. Our plans are to roll it out into a number of additional practice areas this year. The way you do a marketplace is different in every practice area because the kinds of information that you need to gather are going to be a little different. So it will look a little bit different in every practice area, but ultimately the principle is the same. Let consumers bring in their legal problem, present it to a number of lawyers, and let the lawyers put their proposals forth so the consumer can compare them and make a more informed choice.
Do you think that some practice areas aren't appropriate for bidding?
There probably are some. I wouldn't necessarily go so far as to say not appropriate, because I think every practice area, it benefits consumers of legal services to have more information across the board. Now there may be practice areas where things are too complex to be fully presented in that kind of format. I'm not sure exactly what they would be, but I'm open to the possibility that that may be the case, or there may be practice areas that are too small or too specialized for there to be a fully liquid market.
You know, it's kind of unusual that Avvo is an advocate for the consumer, and its customer is really the lawyer
Right.
that advertises with you. Is there a tension there? Do you see an inconsistency there?
I don't see an inconsistency. There's a little bit of tension sometimes with some lawyers who think, well, we're the customers. It should be all about us, and we want Avvo to be really useful for lawyers. But what I always try to reinforce with lawyers is that the reason Avvo is useful for lawyers, and the thing that makes it valuable to lawyers, is first and foremost the fact that it's useful to consumers. If Avvo was not useful to consumers, if we did whatever lawyers wanted us to, if we deleted their sanctions, deleted their negative client reviews, basically ran it solely for the benefit of lawyers, it would quickly be non-useful for consumers. Our traffic would dry up, consumers would stop using it, and they would stop being connected with all of these great lawyers. And so that's the inherent tension that's built into a marketplace like this, that we've got to make it useful for consumers, and sometimes that's going to butt heads with a lawyer's own personal interests.
Well, I noticed that on some First Amendment issues, sometimes you're against lawyers on those issues, and sometimes you're with them regarding the lawyer's right to advertise. Is there any inconsistency there?
I wouldn't say I'm against lawyers. I mean, I am certainly, I'm against lawyers who don't respect the First Amendment. And I certainly argue with a lot of lawyers who don't understand the First Amendment and think that somehow it means that we can't publish information about them or our opinion of them in the form of the Avvo rating. So yes, if you're saying I'm against lawyers in that respect, then I am.
Well, you're on the other side of a V, and you're...
When they're making that sort of, not anti-First Amendment argument, then yes. But I mean, principally, I'm a huge advocate of the open exchange of information, of transparency, of supporting First Amendment rights across the board. And that applies both to Avvo's right to publish information about lawyers, to publish our opinion in the form of the Avvo rating, and the right of lawyers to fully communicate to the public about their services, which is something where I think the bars do both lawyers and the public a real disservice by having overly intrusive advertising rules.
Well, we talked about this little bit before. What about professionals, professional organizations that attempt to limit a lawyer's or even a financial advisor or a doctor ability to join networking referral groups? Is that a violation of the First Amendment in your view, or freedom of association?
It's ridiculous. I mean, it's the idea that a licensing authority could restrict an attorney's ability to associate with a given group is just flatly unconstitutional.
In any professional organization?
Any professional organization.
And
yeah.
why do you think it's unconstitutional?
Well, it has to do, it's similar to what we face in advertising when we're talking about speech, is that a lot of these professional licensing organizations aren't very familiar with the First Amendment, or they choose to ignore it. And it's a common problem with regulators across every industry, is there's a natural tendency amongst regulators to regulate. And they don't always pay attention to the fact that there are these First Amendment principles that fundamentally limit their ability to regulate. And so you will sometimes run into these attitudes where it's like, well, we think this may be a problem if you're associating with this group or communicating in this way, and so we're going to say you can't do it.
The bars are saying
this. The bars might say that, and they say that a lot when it comes to advertising regulation. But the fact is, their hands are tied when it comes to the First Amendment. Lawyers have First Amendment rights, whether it's to speech or association. And yes, there can be some limitations on that in the advertising context, and there can be limitations on that in the context of maintaining client confidences and the like, but not to the extent where you are flat out banning association and memberships, not to the point where you are saying that anything a lawyer writes is subject to the attorney advertising rules. Not to the extent where you are applying liability under the advertising rules to things that aren't written by the lawyer. There's a lot of examples out there that the bars are really struggling with all the ways that lawyers are communicating these days.
Well, let's talk about Florida for a little bit. Florida is pretty aggressive in its efforts of prior restraint of lawyer advertising. What happened in that state?
Well, Florida has they have some of the most extensive advertising regulation in the country, and they actually just in the last couple of weeks revamped their advertising rules. And I think they actually made them worse. But one of the features that's always been present in Florida's advertising rules is this requirement that your advertisements have to be cleared by an advertising committee. So you pay the advertising committee, I think it's $150 per ad. You got to wait for them to do the review. It's a bit of a kangaroo court. I mean, they might change their minds after, you might have something, and this has happened with cases that have been litigated against Florida, where you have something like a tagline that's been fine for the advertising review board for years and years and years. Suddenly it's got some new members, maybe they're your competitors, and they decide they don't like it. It's a horrible system. And a number of other states have systems like that. They've never been subjected to a real constitutional challenge. The Federal Trade Commission has consistently pounded on the bars to get rid of these advertising review boards. Yes, because they're anti-consumer. They make it hard for attorneys to engage in flexible and reactive advertising. It makes it hard for them to provide more information to the consuming public. And there's all sorts of there's basic antitrust problems with having a system where you have an advertising board that could be made up of an attorney's competitors who are reviewing their ads and saying whether they pass muster or not.
Wow. Well, let's talk about what's going on in South Carolina. And suppose you own your profile or accept your ownership of a profile, whether it be Avvo or some other website, then I understand that in South Carolina they claim that you're responsible for whatever goes on that website, whether or not you put it on there.
Yeah, so South Carolina issued an ethics opinion a couple of years ago, which it basically said that if you, it has to do with this testimonial advertising, which is prohibited or restricted in South Carolina and Florida and some other states, and how that would apply to client reviews on a site like Avvo. And they basically said that if a review is left by a third party on one of these sites, you need to do everything in your power to get it removed. And if they won't remove it, then you need to disassociate, unclaim your profile, whatever the case may be. Completely ridiculous position. Another circumstance where every testimonial limitation that's been tested in federal court has been stricken down on constitutional grounds. So we have that. We also have the fact that there's no way that an attorney can be liable for third-party comments that are left on a site like that. Quite apart from the constitutional issue, there's a federal statute, 47 U.S.C. Section 230, which I like to call the law that makes the internet go, which says that a forum service provider or a user of an interactive service is not responsible for things that other people write. It provides complete immunity from defamation liability, for example, for a site like Avvo or for Yelp for third-party reviews that are left on the site. And the same would go for an attorney. There's no way an attorney can be liable for something that a client writes about them that they're not responsible for publishing. It'd be a different story if they hired someone to build a website for them and to go solicit some client feedback and massage it and put it up on that website. Then they're responsible for it. But when it's completely independent like that, the USC Section 230, 47 USC 230, completely preempts the bar's ability to discipline the attorneys for that. And it makes sense, too. I mean, why should an attorney be responsible? I mean, the whole purpose of having these open forums where people can leave feedback, like on Avvo, is so that it's independent and credible and is a somewhat neutral source for people to get that information.
So, from a lawyer's perspective who was advertising in one of these states and the state slapped his hand, the place to resolve that issue would be federal court, not state court.
Yeah, I always tell people if you, and I understand not every attorney wants to be the poster child
like
for the
no attorney does.
For the enforceability of their state bars. Well, some of them do, and I
really?
mean to their credit, will bring these lawsuits in federal court, and that's frankly the only way we can get rid of some of these overreaching state bar regulations is by lawyers challenging them in federal court, and they do from time to time. We just need to see more of it. It hasn't happened in South Carolina. It's happened in a number of cases in Florida. It happened recently in New York and Louisiana, but the testimonial one in particular in Florida and South Carolina, I think, is ripe to be tested out.
Have you ever written an amicus brief in any of these cases?
I have not written any amicus briefs, but I've written a lot of commentary in newspaper articles and blog posts about what I perceive to be the overreaching aspect of some of these state advertising rules.
I noticed that Avvo relaunched its blog.
Mm-hmm.
What is new about the blog?
Well, we're always changing things around, and so one of the things we did over the last year or so is we've moved a lot of we've basically split our focus as we've gotten bigger when it comes to our blogging, and so all of our legal marketing type information, sort of informative thought leadership, things like that, which includes all of my ethics talks and information on attorney advertising, we've moved on to the Lawyer-nomics blog. The Avvo blog itself, we've cut back to more of a core focus on the Avvo product team. So what is Avvo? How do we think about product from a web perspective? How do we position things for consumers? And so it's just went through a relaunch in the last month, and so we'll have a lot of hopefully great insight from our product and design teams on how they think about interactive design.
I've noticed that Avvo does a lot of webinars, and I found them very useful because you can sit there in your pajamas and watch them at home. You're going to do more webinars?
Yeah, we do. We have a regular webinar series, and if you go to ignite.avvo.com, you can look at Avvo University, and there's a list of all of our webinars as well as replays of our past webinars. I myself, I do a monthly webinar, typically on social media and the intersection between social media and the advertising rules or the law of blogging. I do a program called Someone Online Hates You, which is how to respond to negative feedback online. But those are CLE courses. They're approved in a number of states, and I do those monthly. It's a free webinar.
So Avvo has a product, you mentioned it in your last answer, Avvo Ignite.
Right.
What is Avvo Ignite? What's its purpose? Is it working?
Yeah, Avvo Ignite's really an exciting product, and it's a bit of a departure for us in that it is, everything else we've done is sort of media and web-based and consumer-focused. Avvo Ignite is our first foray into a software product for lawyers. And so it is, there's two sides to it. One is a way for lawyers to very easily get very nice, mobile-optimized websites. So if you don't have a website or if you're unhappy with your website, it's a very simple, clean, crisp. You will always benefit from everything we know about how to make things work online. You'll have that website through Avvo. The other piece of Ignite, though, that's really interesting is the lead management functionality. Yes. So Avvo Ignite Suite is essentially a universal dashboard, a universal inbox, as it were, where all of your intake from clients, from potential clients, so all of your inquiries, whether they're coming from your website, your Avvo profile, even a phone number, all go into a single box where you can sort them, you can set follow-up rules, you can assign them to different people in your firm, you can set notifications, drip campaigns, autoresponders. It's a whole way to drive lawyers to follow up on leads much more effectively and much more quickly, because we've found that it's absolutely critical to follow up on inquiries into your office within the first 5 minutes.
Wow, that soon?
That soon. I mean, almost all the value in following up on a lead is in the first 5 minutes. And I know that sounds a little shocking, but there's some research on this, and I think that if we all think about how we behave as consumers, we see the logic in that. I mean, if you need to have a leak fixed under your sink, you'll go find a referral. However, you start finding a list of people to call. If you don't hear back from the first one or don't get a hold of them right away, you're probably going to call the next person on your list and then the next person. There's no reason to think that the law is really any different than that. And that's why we really try to reinforce the message that you need to be, and given what lawyers pay for potential client contacts, you're really doing yourself a disservice if you don't have a process for staying on top of those contacts.
Got it. Now, there's a conference coming up. It's called Lawyer-nomics.
Right.
It used to be called Avvocating.
Right.
What's the name change mean anything?
Well, you know, we'd done the Avvocating conference for a number of years, and we'd taken some advice that maybe people thought that it was all about Avvo, which it really wasn't. I mean, the conference has always been about sort of a deep dive into the technical side of legal marketing online. And so we've always brought in people from LinkedIn, from Google, people who really know a lot about search. It's really that a very interactive type of conference for people who want to learn more about how to market their practice online. not just about Avvo. And so that's, we want to get away from that name a little bit, and it also ties in with our legal marketing blog, which is Lawyeronomics.
Got it.
We also moved it to Las Vegas, which we figured was a more attractive destination in April than Seattle in January, which is when we typically done the advocating conference.
What's the date again?
It's in late April. It's the last weekend in April.
Okay. Now, what's the future of social media? What's the future of Avvo? What do you see in the future for you? Let's look forward a little bit.
Yeah, this is going to be a really interesting year for us. I mean, we continue to, we're fully focused on legal now. We continue to set records every month in terms of the consumers coming to our site, the advertisers engaging with our site, the amount of consumer contacts we're passing on to lawyers every month. We only continue to see that growing over this year. We are very interested to see what happens with Ignite. It's been very, very well received by the lawyers who are using it in the couple of months since we launched it. And so we expect to see that grow rapidly this year. And then the marketplace, seeing what's going to happen with the marketplace this year. That's so far the early results out of speeding tickets and divorce are very promising, just in terms of the number of consumers who are putting their information in there, getting multiple proposals from lawyers and choosing their lawyer that way. We think it's got a great deal of promise.
What about social media in general? What do you see coming up in social media that might be different than the past?
Well, what I hope to see is, and what I always try to encourage lawyers to do, is that social media, it's a long-term game, and it's not something you can outsource. It's not a marketing billboard. It's not something you pay someone to do for you. You need to do it yourself.
Make it authentic.
Yeah, and if you're not going to do it yourself, you might as well not bother with social media, because otherwise it's just noise. And so you need to be thinking about it as a way to engage with more, particularly lawyers who are dealing with consumers.
Yeah.
You need to think about social media not as a way to engage with consumers, because it's really hard to do as a lawyer.
Strange sometimes.
Yeah, social media is a way to engage with other lawyers who will make you a better lawyer or potentially be referral sources.
So it's a great opportunity for both.
It is. Think of it as taking the networking that lawyers have traditionally done with colleagues and referral sources on a local level and moving it online.
Great. Thank you very much for taking time to talk with me, Josh.
Thanks, I've enjoyed it.
See you later.
Okay, take care.